Hi readers, welcome back. I'm going to get started right away today because we have a lot to still read in chapter 2. At the end of what we read yesterday, we saw that Jacob found that box from his grandfather that had all of those photographs in them from the ones that he had seen as a child, but then also some extra ones, and he's kind of convinced now that they are all fake and all made up. So we're going to see what happens next today. Let's dive in. So that's it, Dr. Golan said. His death was meaningless? I've been lying on the couch waiting, watching a fish tank in the corner. It's one golden prisoner swimming in lazy circles. Unless you got a better idea, I said. Some big theory about what it all means that you haven't told me. Otherwise, what? Otherwise, this is just a waste of time. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose as if trying to dispel a headache. What your grandfather's last words meant isn't my conclusion to draw, he said. It's what you think that matters. That is such psychobabble, I spat. It's not what I think that matters, it's what's true. But I guess we'll never know, so who cares? Just dope me up and collect the bill. I wanted him to get mad, to argue, to insist I was wrong, but instead he sat poker-faced, drumming the arm of his chair with his pen. It sounds like you're giving up, he said after a moment. I'm disappointed. You don't strike me as a quitter. Then you don't know me very well, I replied. So we've got a break here, so that means we're changing either time or a setting. I could not have been less in the mood for a party. I'd known I was in for one the moment my parents began dropping unsubtle hints about how boring and uneventful the upcoming weekend was sure to be, when we all knew perfectly well I was turning 16. I'd begged them to skip the party this year because, among other reasons, I couldn't think of a single person I wanted to invite. But they worried that I spent too much time alone, clinging to the notion that socializing was therapeutic. So was electroshock, I reminded them. But my mother was loath to pass up even the flimsiest excuse for a celebration. She once invited friends over for our cockatiel's birthday. That's a bird. In part because she loved to show off our house. Wine in hand, she'd heard guests from room to over-furnished room, extolling the genius of the architect and telling war stories about the construction. It took months to get these sconces from Italy. We'd just come home from my disastrous session with Dr. Golan. I was following my dad into our suspiciously dark living room as he muttered things like, "What a shame we didn't get to plan anything for your birthday," and, "Oh well, there's always next year." When all the lights flooded on to reveal streamers, balloons, and a motley assortment of aunts, uncles, cousins I rarely spoke to, anyone my mother could get to attend, and Ricky, whom I was surprised to see lingering near the punch bowl, looking comically out of place in a studded leather jacket. Once everyone had finished cheering, and I'd finished pretending to be surprised, my mom slipped her arm around me and whispered, "Is this okay?" I was upset and tired and just wanted to play Warspire 3, The Summoning, before going to bed with the TV on. But what were we going to do, send everyone home? I said it was fine, and she smiled as if to thank me. "Who wants to see the new edition?" she sang out, pouring herself some Chardonnay before marching a troop of relatives up the stairs. Ricky and I nodded to each other from across the room, wordlessly agreeing to tolerate the other's presence for an hour or two. We hadn't spoken since the day he nearly shoved me off the roof, but we both understood the importance of maintaining the illusion of having friends. I was about to go talk to him when my Uncle Bobby grabbed me by the elbow and pulled me into a corner. Bobby was a big barrel-chested guy who drove a big car and lived in a big house and would eventually succumb to a big heart attack from all the foie gras and monster thick burgers he'd packed into his colon over the years, leaving everything to my cousins and his tiny, quiet life. He and my Uncle Les were co-presidents of Smart Aid, and they were always doing this, pulling people into corners for conspiratorial chats, as if plotting a mob hit rather than complimenting the hostess on her guacamole. "So, your mom tells me you're really turning a corner with, on this whole grandpa thing." My thing. No one knew what to call it. "Acute stress reaction," I said. "What?" "That's what I had. Have, whatever." "That's good, real good to hear." He waved his hand as if putting all that unpleasantness behind us. "So your mom and I were thinking, how'd you like to come up to Tampa this summer? See how the family business works. Crack heads with me at an HQ for a while. Unless you love stocking shelves." He laughed so loudly that I took an involuntary step backwards. You could even stay at the house, do a little tarpon fishing with me and your cousins on the weekend. He then spent 5 long minutes describing his new yacht, going into elaborate, almost pornographic detail, as if that alone were enough to close the deal. When he finished, he grinned and stuck out his hand for me to shake. So what do you think, J-Dog? I guess it was designed to be an offer I couldn't refuse. But I'd rather spend my summer in a Siberian labor camp than live with my uncle and his spoiled kids. As for working at Smart Aid HQ, I know it was probably an inevitable part of my future, but I'd been counting on at least a few more summers of freedom and 4 years of college before I had to lock myself in a corporate cage. I hesitated, trying to think of a graceful way out. Instead, what I said was, I'm not sure my psychiatrist would think that's such a great idea right now. His bushy eyebrows came together. Nodding vaguely, he said, oh, well, sure, of course. We'll just play it by ear then, pal. How's that sound? And then he walked off without waiting for an answer, pretending to see someone from across the room whose elbow he needed to grab. My mother announced that it was time to start opening presents. She always insisted I do this in front of everyone, which was a problem because, as I may have already mentioned, I'm not a good liar. That also means I'm not good at feigning gratitude for regifted CDs of country Christmas music or subscriptions to Field and Stream. For years, Uncle Les had labored under the baffling delusion that I am outdoorsy. But for decorum's sake, I forced a smile, and held up each unwrapped trinket for all to admire until the pile of presents left the coffee table had shrunk to just 3. I reached for the smallest one first. Inside was the key to my parents' 4-year-old luxury sedan. They were getting a new one, my mom explained, so I was inheriting the old one. My first car! Everyone oohed and awed, but I felt my face go hot. It was too much like showing off to accept such a lavish present in front of Ricky, whose car cost less than my monthly allowance at age 12. It seemed like my parents were always trying to get me to care about money, but I didn't really. Then again, it's easy to say you don't care about money when you have plenty of it. The next present was the digital camera I begged my parents for all last summer. Wow, I said, testing its weight in my hand. This is awesome. I'm outlining a new bird book, my dad said. I was thinking maybe you could take the pictures. A new book? My mom exclaimed. That's a phenomenal idea, Frank. Speaking of which, whatever happened to that last book you were working on? I'm still ironing out a few things, my dad replied quietly. Oh, I see. I could hear Uncle Bobby snickering. Okay, I said loudly, reaching for the last present. This one's from Aunt Susie. Actually, my aunt said as I began tearing away the wrapping paper, it's from your grandfather. A present from his grandfather. Interesting. I stopped mid-tear. The room went dead quiet. People looking at Aunt Susie as if she'd invoked the name of some evil spirit. My dad's jaw tensed, and my mom shot back the last of her wine. Just open it and you'll see, Aunt Susie said. I ripped away the rest of the wrapping paper to find an old hardback book, dog-eared and missing its dust jacket. It was The Selected Works of Ralph Waldo Emerson. I stared at it as if trying to read through the cover, unable to comprehend how it had come to occupy my now trembling hands. No one but Mr. Golan knew about the last words, and he'd promised on several occasions that unless I threatened to guzzle Drano or do a backflip off the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, everything we talked about in his office would be held in confidence. I looked at my aunt, a question on my face that I didn't quite know how to ask. She managed a weak smile and said, I found it in your grandfather's desk when we were cleaning out the house. He wrote your name in the front. I think he meant for you to have it. God bless Aunt Susie. She had a heart after all. Neat. I didn't know your grandpa was a reader, my mom said, trying to lighten the mood. That was thoughtful. Yes, said my dad through clenched teeth. Thank you, Susan. I opened the book. Sure enough, the title page bore an inscription in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Here's the cover of the book. Here's where his grandfather wrote out to him. And so I guess that's why his Aunt Susie gave it to him, because she found that when they were cleaning out his house. I got up to leave, afraid I might start crying in front of everyone, and something slipped out from between the pages and fell to the floor. I bent to pick it up. It was a letter. Emerson. The letter. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother leaned towards me and in a tense whisper asked if I needed a drink of water, which was mom speak for keep it together, people are staring. I said, I feel a little, and then with one hand over my stomach, I bolted to my room. The letter was handwritten on fine, unlined paper, in looping script so ornate it was almost calligraphy, the black ink varying in tone, like that of an old fountain pen. It read, you get to see the letter. Dearest Abe, I hope this note finds you safe in the best of health. It's been such a long time since we last received word from you. But I write not to admonish, only to let you know that we still think of you often and pray for your well-being, our brave, handsome Abe. As for life on the island, little has changed, but quiet and orderly is the way we prefer things. I wonder if we would recognize you after so many years, although I'm certain you'd recognize us. Those few who remain, that is. It would mean a great deal to have a recent picture of you, if you've one to send. I've included a positively ancient snap of myself. E misses you terribly. Won't you write to her? With respect and admiration, Headmistress Alma LaFay Peregrine. And here's the photo. As promised, the writer had enclosed an old snapshot. I held it under the glow of my desk lamp, trying to read some detail in the woman's silhouetted face. There was none to find. The image was so strange, and yet it was nothing like my grandfather's pictures. There were no tricks here. It was just a woman smoking a pipe. It looked like Sherlock Holmes' pipe, curved and drooping from her lips. My eyes kept coming back to it. Was this what my grandfather had meant for me to find? Yes, I thought. It has to be. Not the letters of Emerson, but a letter tucked inside Emerson's book. But who was this headmistress, this Peregrine woman? I studied the envelope for a return address, but only found a faded postmark that read, Cairnholm Island, Cymru, UK. I'm sure I butchered that. Sorry, I'll look it up later. UK, that was Britain. I knew from studying atlases as a kid that Cymru meant Wales. Cairnholm Island had to be the island Miss Peregrine had mentioned in her letter. Could it have been the same island where my grandfather lived as a boy? 9 months ago, he told me to find the bird. 9 years ago, he had sworn that the children's home where he lived was protected by a bird who smoked a pipe. At age 7, I'd taken this statement literally, but the headmistress in this picture was smoking a pipe, and her name was Peregrine, a kind of hawk. What if the bird my grandfather wanted me to find was actually the woman who'd rescued him, the headmistress of the children's home? Maybe she was still on the island after all these years, old as dirt, but sustained by a few of her wards, children who'd grown up but never left. For the first time, my grandfather's last words began to make a strange kind of sense. He wanted me to go to the island and find this woman, his old headmistress. If anyone knew the secrets of his childhood, it would be her. But the envelope's postmark was 15 years old. Was it possible she was still alive? I did some quick calculations in my head. If she'd been running a children's home in 1939 and was, say, 25 at the time, then she'd be in her late 90s today. So it was possible. There were older people than that in Englewood who still lived by themselves and drove. And even if Miss Peregrine had passed away in the time since she'd sent the letter, there might still be people on Cairnholm who could help me. People who had known Grandpa Portman as a kid. People who knew his secrets. We, she had written, those few who remain. we're going to stop here at the break because I'm getting up to your all's time. We're getting close to the end of chapter 2, so we'll finish it tomorrow. But I'm so excited about this chapter because we finally have a little bit of like clues into this mystery that his grandfather kind of gave him on in his last words. So go on with your reading lesson, and we'll read more tomorrow.